Florence glittered like a sin I hadn't confessed yet. The rain lacquered the stones along Via del Proconsolo, turning the pavement into a mirror that reflected both heaven and sewage with equal indifference. The air smelled of wet basil, diesel, and history, a blend so precise it could intoxicate or absolve, depending on what you came here to forget. I walked slowly, not because of the heels, but because Florence demanded reverence. Every step was an act of trespassing through centuries of other people's desires. The city didn't belong to anyone. It seduced you into believing it did. Inside me hummed that familiar restlessness, the kind that masquerades as purpose. I told myself I was here for research, that the night was just data waiting to be observed. But the truth was simpler, cheaper. I wanted to see the myth breathing. I wanted to watch contradiction sit down for a drink. That morning, Professor Vieri had raised an eyebrow at the newest direction of my thesis draft. Moral dissonance as an experiential study? She said, her tone a blend of concern and disbelief. Someone has to test the theory, I'd replied. And if the theory tests you back, then I'll publish a retraction. She laughed softly, not unkindly. Curiosity is a holy thing, Francesca, but it's still how most martyrs start. Her words followed me out the door, through the rain, into the night. A benediction wrapped as a warning. The bar was small, discreet, and perfectly chosen. I'd found it on the third night of reconnaissance, the kind of place where people came to be unseen by the wrong eyes and noticed by the right ones. The lighting was designed for privacy. Every table existed inside its own small darkness. I paused at the entrance. The glass door wore a halo of condensation, blurring the world inside like a half-remembered dream. My reflection looked back at me, neat, unremarkable, calculated. I'd chosen the gray dress deliberately, elegant but unprovocative, something that whispered competence and not need. Hair-pinned, lipstick neutral, nails bare, the armor of someone pretending she didn't want attention. Inside, the soundscape was engineered restraint. Low jazz, slow conversations, the clink of a glass handled too carefully. The bartender, young and polished, looked up when I entered and nodded like we'd already agreed on discretion. I walked to the bar, my movements rehearsed, but not mechanical. Every gesture was a controlled experiment in invisibility. Enough presence to register, not enough to provoke curiosity. I picked the stool at the far end, the one with the best view of the corner booth. According to the reports, that's where he sat when he came in. Always the same booth, always facing the door, never drinking more than 2 fingers of whiskey. Luca Moretti. Third-generation heir to the Moretti family, a name that never made the papers but haunted every police report between Naples and Milan. Untouchable in court, untraceable in business. Florence didn't speak his name loudly, but it whispered it often. I'd spent months tracing those whispers, bank records, offshore transfers, the unspoken testimonies of people who pretended not to know him. I told myself it was academic, that I was building a psychological map of power's decay. But I knew the real reason. I wanted to understand the mechanism of moral anesthesia. How men like him made atrocity look administrative. Every professor I'd ever had said moral dissonance was an abstraction. Luca Moretti was proof it wasn't. He was the living case study that turned theory into flesh. I ordered a gin and tonic. I hated gin, but it looked scholarly in the glass. Clean, unsentimental, a drink for people who claim moderation. The first sip was ritual, not pleasure. I needed my hands to look busy. The mirror behind the bar framed the room like an interrogation window. From here, I could observe everyone without meeting anyone's eyes. 2 businessmen pretending to be discreet. A woman laughing too loudly into her phone. A pianist with hands too talented for this salary bracket. And the empty corner booth. My thesis in waiting. I took out a small notebook pretending to write, though the words blurred. Observation, objectivity, detachment, the holy trinity of academia. But none of them apply when you can feel your own pulse in your throat. What was I doing? I asked myself again. The answer came, practiced, steady, field study. But beneath it, a quieter voice, temptation disguised as research. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the Arno. The lights flickered, briefly dimming the mirror, and for a second I caught my reflection. Eyes sharper than they should be, posture too deliberate. I didn't look like a scientist. I looked like someone waiting to be caught. I checked my watch. 10:03. Perfect timing. He was due at 10:11. 8 minutes. 8 minutes to remember who I was supposed to be. 8 minutes to decide whether curiosity counts as bravery or self-harm. I replayed the plan in my mind, step by step. Attract, disarm, get close. Not seduce, observe. Not desire, decode. Not fall, ma record. It sounded clinical on paper, almost noble. But academia has always been a respectable disguise for obsession. I thought of Vieri again. Curiosity is how most martyrs start. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's what drew me here. Not knowledge, but the possibility of losing myself under its weight. The bartender refilled someone's glass. Laughter rose and died in the same breath. The air thickened with warmth and the slow chemistry of expectation. I could almost feel him approaching. Not by sound, not by sight, but by the way the room seemed to brace for reconfiguration. I glanced toward the door without meaning to. It hadn't opened yet, but something in me straightened, like a wire pulled taut. A quiet intuition, a premonition of gravity. The plan was still simple: attract, disarm, get close. But beneath that, I could already hear the first crack in the design, the whisper of a variable I hadn't accounted for. I wasn't sure whether it was danger or desire, and maybe, I thought, it wouldn't matter. I faked a faint. I let my body tilt, the glass of untouched gin toppling with me. It was just the right kind of dramatic, calculated carelessness, a stumble engineered to look like chance. My hip kissed the bar with a dull thud. My balance gave way. The room tilted like a verdict. Strong hands caught me before I met the floor. Not desperate, efficient. A heartbeat later, his voice, low, unhurried, faintly amused. "Careful," he said. I looked up. He was sharper than I'd imagined. Less glossy, more dangerous. A quiet built from choices. Eyes like they'd already read your secrets and didn't need confirmation. He looked at me as if he was thinking about risk the way brokers think about time. Not sentimentally, but as a currency that depreciates with inattention. His gaze didn't land. It audited. I'm fine, I murmured, letting breath fracture just enough to sell the performance, trying to steady myself. Letting my hand linger briefly on his arm before pulling back just slow enough. "You don't look fine." I said I'm fine. He glanced at the bartender, a flicker and a nod. The water appeared as if the bar had been trained to anticipate him. He still held my wrist. Not possessive, just deliberate, as if confirming that my pulse obeyed physics. His thumb rested where a clinician would rest it, and the contact was impersonal in the way a blade is impersonal. "Your pulse is fast," he said. "Occupational hazard." I smiled faintly. "And your occupation is psychology." "I'm finishing my doctorate." He tilted his head slightly. "Interesting." He looked at me as if he was thinking how easily people hide behind nouns. Psychology, logistics, control, love. Words as jurisdictions, words as alibis, and you? I asked. He paused. "Logistics?" That made me smile. "Let me guess. High risk, high discretion, no paper trail?" A flicker of something crossed his face. Not irritation, something more precise. Calculation. Like a chess player acknowledging a line he'd hoped I wouldn't see so early. He looked at me as if he was thinking whether my accuracy was skill, luck, or the kind of curiosity that eventually invoices you in blood. "Something like that," he said. I sipped the water, just enough to reset the scene, to file the moment into a folder labeled "Progress Without Exposure." The glass was cold. The room was warm. My hand was steady. My heart wasn't. "You don't like gin," he said. "Why pretend?" "Maybe I enjoy illusions," I replied. "Maybe," he said. "But you don't wear them well." I laughed, soft, a little breathy. He looked at me as if he was thinking the laugh meant danger. Not because it was flirtation, but because it wasn't afraid. His gaze swept. Not the vulgar sweep men use when they inventory a body, but a structural read, like an architect inspecting load-bearing lines. He was assessing stress points. On me, on himself, on the night. You didn't ask my name, I said. I didn't need to, he said. But you're not from this neighborhood. That caught me off guard for half a second. I recovered. Is that part of your logistics skill set? It's part of being someone people watch. You learn to watch back. That line. Cold. Perfect. A project charter for survival. He took the last sip of his drink and rose. The motion was minimal. Waste nothing, reveal less. I expected him to disappear into the night like in the rumors. Sleek, untouchable. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned slightly closer. Not invading, inviting. The air between us shifted temperature the way air shifts when a door to a hotter room opens. He looked at me as if he was thinking about breach points, where the wall ends and the hinge begins. He didn't crowd me. He calibrated. I registered the inputs: distance, angle, ascent like rain on dark fabric, his shadow falling across the bar like a line you cross or don't. I felt the old schematic in me. Attract, disarm, get close, hum like standard operating procedure. He was rewriting my process by inhabiting it. There's something I want to talk to you about, he said. Professional interest? I said, playing along. You could say that, he said. Come to this address. He slid a small card onto the bar. Thick paper, minimalist, embossed with nothing but an address in Fiesole. No name. The kind of card men give when names are liabilities. The address was the name. Tomorrow, 9 p.m. Don't be late. And if I don't come, you will. The confidence wasn't arrogance. It was telemetry. He looked at me as if he was thinking about probabilities, and the numbers were in his favor. He'd measured the angle of my head when I said psychology. He'd measured the time it took me to smile after he said logistics. He was reading lag time and micro-flinches, not flirting. If seduction existed here, it existed at the level of data. Between us, the card lay like a treaty drafted in a dead language. I turned it with a fingertip, heart tapping like a metronome in revolt. The rain outside thickened, drumming the windows, 1,000 soft knocks. He nodded once, final, dismissive, magnetic, and walked out into it like the city bent for him. I let my breath normalize on purpose. Let the room settle. Let the bartender stop looking. Then I picked up the card and tried to hear the address as a sentence. Fiesole, 9 p.m. The hill that sees the whole city and refuses to be seen. A vantage point masquerading as a home. Luca Moretti had taken the bait. What he didn't know was that I'd cast the line. But even as I rehearsed that reassurance, he looked at me as if he was thinking something I couldn't quite script. I replayed the glance he gave me at the threshold, brief, unadorned, almost indifferent. It wasn't conquest. It wasn't curiosity. It was audit, as if he were checking his own reaction for non-compliance, as if he were asking himself whether I belonged in his story, or whether he had just become a chapter in mine. I studied the mirror behind the bar and found him again there by absence. The space he'd vacated, the tension that didn't. I read the signatures he left unconsciously, the bartender's posture softening by 2 degrees, the woman at the corner table relaxing as if a storm had passed, the way the room's noise rose a notch when his mass left its orbit. Charisma is measurable in relief. I ordered another water. The gin glass sat untouched, sweating guilt. I wiped the ring it left on the wood with a napkin and thought about control. His, mine, the city's. Professor Vieri would have said control is a seductive fallacy, a narrative we prefer to contingency. Luca wore it like a tailored suit. He fit it too well. I folded the card into my palm and let the paper warm against my skin. He looked at me as if he was thinking in contingencies. If she arrives, test. If she doesn't, eliminate. If she hesitates, incentivize. But the pause before interesting when I said psychology, that was not contingency. That was curiosity. And curiosity is the first betrayal of control. I settled my tab and left a tip scaled to anonymity. Outside, Florence felt newly washed, aloof and indulgent, a city that sells absolution by the hour. The rain found my face like a ritual I hadn't consented to. I tucked the card under my palm like a second pulse and walked without looking back. Looking back is a different kind of confession. I told myself the plan was intact. Attract, disarm, get close. I told myself he'd behaved exactly as projected. Alert, contained, authoritative, cautious about names and careless about time. I told myself that the touch at my wrist meant nothing, that the way he said careful meant protocol, not preference. I told myself the tremor in my chest was adrenaline. I told myself many beautiful lies. They kept to the end of the block. By San Firenze, the lies needed scaffolding. He looked at me as if he was thinking about the difference between threat and risk. And the part of me that lived on the dissertation's clean pages wanted to parse it. Threat is external, risk is appetite. He had been reading my appetite. I slowed under a cornice and watched the city gloss itself. My reflection wavered in the window of a closed boutique. Not the woman who had walked in at 10:03, a student rehearsing neutrality, but a variant. The line of my shoulders had changed. My mouth was set like someone prepared to be believed. The card in my hand made a subtle ridge under the skin, like a scar the future had already drafted. I thought about what tomorrow at 9 would look like. The villa in Fiesole. The rain thinner, perhaps. The city below arranged like a confession you could audit from above. A room with edges, no clutter, no photographs, furniture that understood silence. A table where he would place something. Files, a request, a feasibility study disguised as conversation. A proposition about a man named Dario, though I didn't yet know the name. Only the shape of the request was visible, like a ledger under blank paper. He looked at me as if he was thinking he could trust me to do something he couldn't. Not because I was loyal, but because I was new. Not because I was harmless, but because I looked like I could be. Trust as a function of access cost. Respect as a function of restraint. A taxi hissed by, water fanning in a soft arc. I didn't raise my hand. I wanted to walk. I wanted to feel the address in my palm become part of my gait. The bells muttered somewhere upriver. A couple argued sotto voce in a doorway, then kissed, like the city's core competency was reconciling contradictions it had authored. At the corner, a man with a newspaper glanced at me without seeing me. I filed him the way Luca had filed me, non-compliant with the narrative. I was learning. I crossed the street, avoiding the black seam where wet stone becomes treachery, and thought about that new unit of measure I'd felt at the bar. The distance between the breath you take for performance and the one you take for survival. In the space of 5 minutes, he had moved me 1 unit closer to the second. He looked at me as if he was thinking I was competent. That was dangerous. People try to save incompetence. They try to use competence. I reached my building and paused under the awning, rain stippling the air in orderly diagonals. I slipped the card from my palm and read it again in the weak light. Fiesole, 9 p.m. A command pretending to be an invitation. I imagined him writing it. No flourish, no name, just coordinates. A man like that believes places are identities. A man like that translates people into roles. A man like that does not imagine being surprised. He had been, for half a second, when I said, high risk, high discretion, no paper trail. And he looked at me as if he was thinking, keep her, but do not name her. Use her, but do not trust her. Test her, and if she passes, test the part of you that wanted her to. I went upstairs and placed the card on my desk beside the tidy stack of articles that had led me here. Case studies of corporate malfeasance, neuroeconomics of guilt, a monograph on the sociology of silence. I added a heading to the top page in a neat hand. Fieldwork, Phase 1 completed. Below it, smaller, he audits. Smaller still, almost illegible. So do I. The room smelled like paper and rain. I shut the window, and the city's sounds softened into interior noise. The hum of the old refrigerator, pipes clicking as if deciding whether to continue, my own pulse recalibrating. I replayed the line again. It's part of being someone people watch. You learn to watch back. The sentence had 2 subjects. In it, he had given away a vulnerability he didn't believe was one. He is watched. The watch develop methods. Methods become prisons. The most efficient cages are self-installed. He looked at me as if he was thinking about that cage without admitting it. And I felt a flash of something like pity, which I refused. Pity is the start of sloppiness. I crossed it out in my mind and replaced it with thesis. How control becomes ritual, how ritual becomes fate. I set an alarm for 8:15 the next evening and Before turning off the lamp, place the card under my pillow. Superstition is just ritual wearing perfume. The paper made a small, reassuring discomfort against the mattress, like a truth that refuses to let you sleep on it. In the dark, I said the plan aloud once softly to hear if it still obeyed me. Attract, disarm, get close. The syllables arranged themselves neatly. The room consented. But the silence after consent had a new texture, like a clause added in invisible ink. He looked at me as if he was thinking there would be a cost. He wasn't wrong. The only unknown was the currency. I closed my eyes and saw again the way his hand had hovered a fraction of a second before catching me. And almost that revealed a man who hates accidents, but believes in gravity. I slept inside that paradox, and the rain wrote its long memo on the city until morning. The note arrived a week later under my apartment door. A time, an address, the table by the window. No name, no signature. The handwriting was surgical. No flourishes. Each letter trimmed to utility like a blade honed too many times to remember its first purpose. I stood there with my coat half on, keys in my mouth, and the little rectangle balanced in my palm like a summons. I told myself not to go. I went because saying no is a theory and saying yes is a body. The restaurant kept the rain outside and the secrets inside. Glass the color of old honey softened the streetlights. Linen softened conversation. Money softened the waiter's shoes. The city was a painting in the window, arches and lamps and wet stone, while inside everything was warm enough to pretend winter belonged to other people. He was already there. Dark suit, no tie. A posture like gravity had negotiated a discount. He didn't stand. He looked at me as though I'd arrived precisely when I should. It was infuriating and accurate. You came, he said. I'm here, I said. Is there a difference? Yes. Being somewhere isn't the same as belonging there. He considered that, head tilting a degree, a hinge that didn't squeak. Do you belong anywhere, Francesca? I didn't remember telling him my name. I decided not to ask how he knew. A question can be a surrender if you let it show its teeth. Tonight I belong to the window, I said, and sat where the city made a painting of itself. The waiter recognized him the way ships recognize lighthouses, without needing to turn their heads. A bottle materialized, labeled discreetly expensive, the cork sigh like a secret relieved of its burden. He ordered without consulting me. I almost objected and didn't, because I wanted to see if his taste was as controlling as his calm. It was very good. I hated that. He poured for me first, a fraction below etiquette, as if he distrusted abundance. The wine smelled like cherries that had learned to keep quiet. I let it breathe. Breathing is the oldest lie. We pretend it makes us patient. You study people like me, he said. I study systems, I said. People make systems. Systems make people. Do you also diagnose them? Only if they're honest. And am I? No, I said. He laughed softly, the kind of sound that makes other people want to join and then realize there's no room. What am I avoiding? Admission? Of what? That the thing you've used to survive will not save you from me. Silence altered temperature. The room didn't fall away. It turned down its volume like a radio someone realized was playing over a prayer. I felt my pulse adjust to the new climate, steady then not. The first rule of proximity is to decide whether your heartbeat belongs to you. We fenced, questions that were really feints, answers that were really maps of where not to step. He asked about my thesis, my professor, my neighborhood. I asked about his childhood. He answered in negative space. What he didn't say, where he redirected, how quickly he changed the subject when I said the word alone. When he smiled, it was not to please. It was to warn. The plates arrived as if the kitchen were run by a metronome. I don't remember ordering. There was sea bass with a skin that broke like quiet glass, and artichokes that had learned the discipline of tenderness. He ate with the attention of a man who knows where every knife is in the room and refuses to make one of them his mouth. I broke the skin of the fish with the side of my fork just to see if he would look up. He didn't. He was watching my hands in the window glass. The rain suits this city, I said. The rain tells you who's serious, he said. About what? About staying. I don't know if I'm staying, I said. You already did, he said, and took another bite like a verdict. He didn't mean Florence. He studied me without appetite, which is a kind of hunger. The light fell across his knuckles, clean bones, immaculate strength. He didn't wear a watch. Men who schedule the world don't need one. He had a small white line near his wrist, a scar so economical it looked like a signature. I wanted to ask how he'd earned it. I wanted to see if he'd lie. I took a sip of wine instead. Your professor, he said, as if the word were a country with an army. Vieri, do you know her? I know who keeps you credible, he said. And who would bury you if you stopped being so? You investigate all your dinner companions? I investigate doubt, he said. That must be a lonely hobby. It is a profession, he said. This is how he looked at me. Not like prey, not like partner, but like a variable. And then, only then, like a woman whose hands didn't shake when the world made a request. The room kept doing its room things. Cutlery. Subdued laughter. A coat shrugged onto a chair back. But the conversation had dislodged itself from time. He leaned back exactly 1 inch, which meant he was closer. The window kept the rain on the other side. He kept everything else on his. What do you do with honesty when you get it? He said. Catalog it, I said. Compare it to retractions. Publish sparingly. And what do you do with men who have none? I put them in footnotes and let them rot. He almost smiled. So you've killed before. Only reputations, I said. They make the best ghosts. A couple 2 tables down argued in the international language of perfect diction. The woman said something like, you don't hear me. The man said something like, I am listening to the wrong part of you. The rain wrote notes against the glass. Even the waiter's shoes had learned to glide. He replenished my wine to the same careful fraction. I matched his restraint, another kind of flirting. When his fingers brushed the stem of my glass, I noticed a tremor that wasn't a tremor. It was readiness, the kind soldiers cultivate when peace is a rumor. Why did you come? He said. You invited me? I left you an address, he said. You decided to make it an invitation. I'm good at making decisions look mutual, I said. I prefer agreements to decisions, he said. They fail more gracefully. We ate. We pretended to be people for whom eating was the point of dinner. The candle might have been a metronome if it weren't busy being beautiful. Outside, a taxi drifted through the street like a shoal of light. Inside, his attention checked the perimeter of my face the way a hand finds the edge of a table in the dark. Tell me something true, he said. I hate gin, I said. I already know that, he said. Tell me something you haven't decided is true yet. I think you don't believe in accidents, I said. I believe in probability, he said. And penalties. For whom? For the unprepared. I thought about probability as flirtation and decided not to publish it. He told me an almost story about a boy and a city in a winter, then stopped before meaning. I told him an almost story about a girl and a library and a stolen book, then stopped at the threshold of confession. We traded edges as if the center were radioactive. When dessert arrived, something with lemon that made the room briefly brighter, he didn't touch it. I let my spoon rest on the plate and listened to my pulse assemble a sentence. Danger and curiosity live together because neither knows how to pay rent alone. He paid without looking at the bill. I didn't pretend to reach. He would have let me perform, but he wouldn't have rewarded it. We stood. The coat fell onto my shoulders like an assignment. After dinner, he drove me home. The car was architectural. Careful leather, no scent, the opposite of sentimental. It swallowed the sound of rain the way a good lie swallows guilt. Cleanly, without residue. The city slid by in slices. Wet lamplight, shuttered shops. A scooter with 2 teenagers balancing an umbrella between them like a dare. A red light bled across his jaw, and for a second I imagined touching it with my mouth just to see if he'd react. My imagination is a trained animal. I keep it on a leash. I stared out the window. Do you always test dangerous men? He said. Only if they test back, do I? You audit, I said, and you. I annotate, I said. He waited until the light turned green. He didn't rush the acceleration. He moved the car as if speed were vulgar. My building approached the way inevitable things do, without drama. We stopped. The rain had thinned to a rumor. My reflection in the window had my mouth, my eyes, but a different posture. Someone who had remembered she was visible. "Come upstairs," he said when we stopped. "I have a question. Business." "Business," I repeated. I said yes because the word was a fig leaf, and denial is a luxury easily sold to oneself in retail quantities. The lobby air tasted like stone and soap, the way buildings taste when they're pretending to be neutral. We didn't speak. In the elevator, he stood a civilian distance away. Men who understand pressure understand thresholds. The walls were mirror bright. We were two clean silhouettes trapped in a chrome confession. The elevator stopped with a gentleness I didn't trust. The corridor was quiet in the way hospitals are quiet. Hushed, prepared. I opened my door. The room inside had the memory of my life. Books trying to look casual, a lamp that forgave late nights, a plant doing its noble best to survive my ambition. He crossed the threshold without asking, which is a question. "Kitchen?" he asked. "Left," I said. He set his coat across a chair, like an argument he'd come back to later. He was not comfortable here. He had the careful economy of a man in unfamiliar geography. I liked that. Men who are at home everywhere are at home nowhere. He didn't sit. He stood by the window and checked the street the way you check a pulse. The rain had downgraded to shine. The city minded its own beauty. "I have a question," he said again, as if the elevator had kept the first one in escrow. "Business," I said, and pretended the word did anything at all to the temperature. He turned from the glass and looked at me as if he was thinking where the strongest shelf in the room was, in case he needed to put something heavy there. His gaze moved lightly, but his mind didn't. I could feel him weighing the room. 2 exits, 1 line of sight to the street, a bookshelf that could hide a folder if belief were still a currency. "What do you need?" I said. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and paused, the smallest delay, like a choice reconsidered and then committed. The pause made me aware of my mouth. I bit the thought until it bled and swallowed. "Context," he said. "An evaluation. Of whom?" "Of a man whose habits I can predict but whose intentions I cannot," he said. "My people can draw patterns. I need a motive inside the pattern." "You want a profile?" I said. He didn't nod. He let the word occupy the room. "Why me?" I said. He studied me the way architects study a site. Wind, light, load. "Because you will tell me the truth even if you like how it feels to lie." "You think I like lying?" "I think you like construction," he said. "Some people build houses. You build explanations. Those can collapse too. They collapse slower," he said. He still hadn't handed me anything. We were standing on a hinge. Hinges are the most honest part of any door. They know exactly when things change. "You left a note under my door," I said. "No name. No signature. Why?" "I prefer addresses," he said. "They can't be mispronounced." "And my name?" I said. "You used it." "I prefer names," he said. "They can be misused." I let the quiet extend. The streetlight wrote a white line across his cheekbone. I wanted to touch it with my thumb and see if light transfers. I didn't. "What is the business?" I asked, and made my voice very still. He took the folder out then, finally, and set it on the table. The cover was matte, the color of a good suit. He didn't slide it toward me yet. He kept one palm flat on it as if paper could bolt. "Before," he said, "answer me something. Ask. Do you know when to stop watching?" he said, "and start believing?" "No," I said, "but I know when to publish." He almost smiled again, a brittle version, the kind that cracks and leaves you holding both halves of a mask. "Good," he said. He lifted his hand. The folder remained. The room became a geography of implication. "Business," I said again, because saying it made us both complicit. He nodded once, a decision acknowledged. The city exhaled in the window. My pulse wrote its minutes on my skin. I reached for the folder. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. A dull, distant thud. We both turned our heads at the same time and then, together, turned them back. We were not the only people in the world, but we were acting as if the world had the decency to wait. "You understand," he said, Softer now. That if you say yes, you can't be neutral. I understand, I said. I was never neutral. He studied my face the way accountants study margins, for proof that the risk was already paid. I kept my expression a ledger. He stepped closer, exactly half a pace. The air acknowledged him. A small current moved between us, the kind you feel standing near a transformer. Power you can't see. The threat of hum. Business, he said, one last time. Business, I repeated, and the word felt like silk tied into a knot. I said yes, because I wanted to know whether wanting would ruin the math. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. The folder waited. The night leaned in. The rain forgot us both. And somewhere in the arithmetic of intention, curiosity put its hand on fear's shoulder and said, "Move." His apartment was immaculate to the point of moral argument. No photos, no clutter. Every surface a thesis on a mission. The air carried that faint hotel-clean scent that comes from money and the refusal to leave traces, cedar, stone, and something metallic, like a memory of rain. The windows were tall enough to flatter the night. Florence lay below, disciplined into light. He set his coat on a chair as if even fabric owed him alignment, then placed a folder on the glass table and slid it toward me. The folder made a quiet sound, a small, decisive punctuation. I sat without being asked. He remained standing a beat longer than manners require, a subtle exercise in altitude, then took the seat opposite, not too near, not too far. He had a talent for the median that felt like control rather than compromise. Dario Centauri, he said. He is not a rival. He is a rot. I need a read on him that my people can't produce. The name felt like a cold coin in my palm. I opened the folder. Faces. Files. A woman in a black dress laughing too hard. Laughter raised to the edge of hysteria so it could pass for charm. A man in sunglasses shaking hands with a person the photograph had amputated. Receipts that pretended to be philanthropy. Notes in tidy, neutral handwriting, the kind that declines to admit the human hand. He's charming, I said. So is arsenic. I looked up. Tell me. He folded his arms. His voice lost its velvet and chose granite. We're about to finalize a joint acquisition. 3 casinos along the Tyrrhenian coast. He has political connections I need. But every man who's gone into business with him disappears. Quietly. Financially. Sometimes literally. You think he'll use you and cut you out? I think he's already planning it. I nodded slowly. The room absorbed the motion and filed it. So why not kill him? Because I don't move without certainty. Not anymore. That anymore carried a ghost with a forwarding address. A pause followed, unrushed, measured. His gaze held mine 1 second too long, like someone testing a rope for weight. I need to know what he's thinking, he went on. His rhythms, his soft spots, his lies. I need to know who he trusts, his mouth tightened by half a degree. Who he fears. I closed the folder. The glass table returned my reflection in a thin, accusing layer. And how exactly do you want me to get this information? He's single, vain, addicted to novelty. He spoke as if delivering logistics, not lives. You'll cross his path twice, once at a gallery opening next Friday, once at a charity gala the week after. I'll make sure you're on both lists. So you want me to infiltrate, charm him, let him think you're interested, build enough curiosity that he talks without realizing it. You want me to seduce him? I want you to gather intelligence. The distinction mattered to him. How you do it is your call. He'll try to sleep with me. Of course he will. I let that hang in the air like a loaded question. The silence adjusted its tie. You think I can handle that? His voice dropped, softened without losing edge. I think you've already decided you can, I exhaled. The sound barely left my lips, but he looked at my mouth as if sound had shape. And why me? Because I've watched you lie, gracefully, beautifully, and you never flinch. Because you know how people think before they know they're thinking, and because you're not afraid to be underestimated. Compliment is calculus. The words settled in the room like a scent you can't name but recognize when it leaves. What's the payment? He named a number that made me blink. It wasn't generous. It was dangerous. Priced not for labor but for liability. That's a lot of money for observation, I said. It's not for observation. It's for risk. You'll be unarmed, alone, inside a mind I can't see through. You don't trust anyone, I said. I don't trust intentions, he corrected. Actions I respect. Yours say you're curious. That's enough for now. I picked up the folder again. Dario's eyes looked out from a page with a kind of blank that only very practiced men achieve. The blank that comes from rehearsed sincerity. A twinge moved through me, not fear, something narrower. Proximity to a problem that might outpace my favorite tools. What if I like him? I asked. He didn't smile. The not smiling was eloquent. Then I hope, he said, you lie to him as well as you did to me tonight. There it was. Admission without confession. He rose and walked to the window, the city glancing off his shoulder like secondary light. He said nothing for a long time, as if silence were a colleague with veto power. If you say yes, he said without turning, you start tomorrow. The room seemed to tilt by a fraction, as if the villa itself had taken a step closer to the cliff. I took the folder and stood to leave. You always send people into fire with paperwork? I asked. He turned then. Expression unreadable, no, underreadable. The kind of face that punishes too literal interpretations. Only the ones who don't burn easily. I reached for the doorknob. His voice caught me mid-motion, unraised, but it reached. Francesca, I turned. My name in his mouth was not a possession. It was a hypothesis. He stepped closer, slowly, like he was approaching a line unable to decide whether it was chalk or marble. Be careful. I let the silence stretch until it bowed. You don't seem like the type who says that to his employees. You don't seem like the type who needs to be told, he said. I didn't move. The night leaned in against the glass. Somewhere below us, a siren considered its options and declined. He raised his hand, not to take, but to hover. His fingertips grazed my jaw, then the side of my neck, the kind of touch used by men who doubt belief but practice reverence. Heat gathered where his hand paused, the kind that makes the body remember it is as much instrument as witness. This isn't part of the job, he said. No. I kissed him. Just once. Controlled. Precise. A kiss with the taste of rules and the promise they would not survive the quarter. He didn't. Try to take control from me. That was the surprise. He accepted the governance of that single moment and let it do its work. His breath was velvet over flint. I felt the exact instant his control hairline cracked, like pressure finding a seam in stone. And then I pulled back. Not as refusal, but as verdict. Good night, Mr. Moretti. For a half beat, he didn't blink. Then the breath he hadn't taken arrived, and unsettled him by a degree no one else would notice. The folder in my hand had weight. The air had more. I left him standing there. Shoulders precise, pulse misbehaving. Control cracked just enough to make the next move inevitable. The corridor carried my footsteps like disclosures. The elevator mirrored me back as if asking for corroboration. In the cab, the city redistributed itself into wet geometry. Bridges, lamps, cobblestone arrhythmias. I opened the folder and stared at Dario's photo. I've seen monsters before, but this one looked like the kind that asks you to dance and keeps time with your heartbeat, to learn the choreography of your fear. I closed the folder and let it rest on my lap like a sleeping animal. The driver hummed something unmemorable. My hands were steady. My mouth was not. I touched my lower lip with the back of my finger as if verifying a rumor. I told myself the kiss was tactical, an insertion of noise into an algorithm designed to be noiseless. I told myself that emotion deployed at the right amplitude is simply another instrument of analysis. I told myself I was still the woman who came here to write a dissertation, not a eulogy. The cab turned toward the river. Water wore the city like glass. On the far bank, a couple pressed themselves into a doorway, welded by weather and impulse. The world loves symmetry. It invents it where it can't find it. At a light, the driver looked at me in the mirror and then away, the universal reflex around women who look like they've made a choice. By the time we reached my street, the rain had thinned to discipline. I paid in cash because receipts are biographies, and I had enough of those already. Upstairs, I placed the folder on my desk and stood a long time without sitting. The room felt misfiled, as if my life had shifted 3 centimeters to the left. and all the edges were wrong. On the inside cover of the folder, a small post-it, the gallery invitation, the gala credential mock-up, both already handled. My name where it shouldn't be, my future where it hadn't been. I should have been afraid. Instead, I was fluent. I turned off the lamp and the room turned into a diagram of shadow. In bed, sleep approached like an auditor. Behind my eyes, Luca's face at the moment after was a negative, then a print, then nothing. I understood that the single kiss had not weakened, but rather weaponized the boundary. Tomorrow it would hold or it would not. Either way, it had been drawn by my mouth. Before I slept, I listed facts in the dark like beads, Dario Santori. Rot disguised as sponsorship. 3 casinos. Leverage disguised as infrastructure. Luca's certainty. A religion with recent heresies. Payment. Danger priced as discretion. My yes. Curiosity crossing the Rubicon without checking the depth. Outside, the city rehearsed its alibi. We were only beautiful. What you did in our light is on you. I slept on the lie that I was still only studying them. Morning would have thoughts about that. Fieldwork began with a dress I could move in, and a lie I could repeat. The dress was soft enough to suggest surrender, structured enough to imply boundaries. The lie was the same one I'd told myself in Florence. I'm only here to observe. I entered Santori's orbit the way academics enter archives, quietly, with a list, the list. The Tornabuoni bar where he ended nights with Amaro. The private gallery he funded to launder taste into legitimacy. The charity committee that converted reputation into receipts. I went as myself. Francesca, the doctoral candidate studying decision-making under pressure. The mask worked because it was mostly true. Authenticity is the most elegant disguise. The gallery was all white marble and understatement, the kind of wealth that pretends it has outgrown itself. Paintings leaned against the walls like overheard confessions. A quartet played something that sounded like regret. I positioned myself beside a painting of drowning saints, bodies reaching for air they didn't expect to find. He came to stand beside me, the way men come to stand beside a test. "You like impossible survivals?" he said. "I like honest endings," I said. "Then you like fiction," he said. His voice had the texture of polished gravel. I turned just enough to meet his eyes. Dario Santori was beautiful in that dangerous, mirror-smooth way men become when they've been rewarded for not blinking. His smile was effortless and mercenary. I could see why people mistook charm for light. He introduced himself with a name everyone already knew. I offered mine like a hypothesis I might withdraw. He asked what I studied. "How people edit their guilt," I said. He laughed like he'd found a mirror. He told me the painting reminded him of business. People pretending to save one another while calculating the angle of the fall. I said nothing. Silence works better than flirtation when you want to be remembered. We circled the room together like punctuation marks in the same sentence. Every few steps, someone greeted him. Every few steps, he tested whether I'd stay. I stayed, still, interested, unowned. When he handed me a glass of wine, I watched how his fingers curved around the stem, careless, entitled, used to being obeyed. He spoke of art as though it were proof of intelligence, not emotion. I nodded in the right places, pretending to be charmed by his cynicism. At one point, he leaned closer, voice almost a whisper. "You know, I can always tell when someone is pretending not to want something." I smiled. "Then you must spend a lot of time watching yourself." He liked that. The small flicker in his eyes gave it away. Predators enjoy being met in their own dialect. The first dinner invitation arrived the next day, written on heavy stationery that smelled faintly of sandalwood and risk. Friday, 8 o'clock. The view is worth the company. No name, no address, just a location printed in ink that looked like the residue of a secret. I accepted because data doesn't collect itself. But as I pressed send, I realized I'd stopped thinking in hypotheses. The experiment had begun, and I was both observer and variable. That night, I wrote in my notes, "Santori smiles with half his mouth, as if saving the other half for after the verdict." Then below it, smaller, "Luca will read this line and know it isn't about Santori." I reported to Luca after each contact. Nights at Bello Sguardo became our operating theater. The villa turned into a geography of secrets. Maps spread across glass tables, ink stains like minor wounds, our reflections suspended in the window while Florence glittered below, obedient and far away. The city looked delicate from that height, manageable, almost innocent. Distance is a kind of anesthesia. He asked questions the way surgeons test reflexes. What is he selling when he isn't selling? Cleanliness, I said. He wants to look as if dirt refuses to stick. Buyers? Men who think sin is a stain you can outsource. Luca smiled, barely. They always think that. He poured me a drink I never finished. He watched how far it moved across the table, how long before I touched it. Every movement was data. Everything between us became experiment. He made me say everything twice, in different words, to hear where language slipped. That was how he found truth. Pressure and repetition. Some nights he paced while I spoke, tracing circles like a predator rehearsing patience. Other nights he stayed utterly still. The only movement the slow shift of his gaze from my eyes to my hands. I could never tell which unnerved me more. I brought him the first real thread a week later. Santori is moving cash through a shell investment vehicle, I said. A fund with a Latin name and no staff. Source? Luca said. His mouth, I said. He thinks I don't understand finance. Then he changed the subject too fast when I said custodian bank. Drummed his fingers. Left or right hand? Right, middle finger hardest. He nodded once, confirmation of a tell he already suspected. The satisfaction was minimal, quiet, dangerous. Don't spook him, he said. Names next, patterns after. So we wait, I said. We collect, he said. Waiting felt like agreeing to bleed later. That night the silence between us was different, heavier, threaded with something neither of us wanted to identify. The city hummed below us like a patient under anesthesia, dreaming of absolution. I turned a page in my notebook. The sound was too loud. Luca stood by the window, looking not at the view, but at the reflection of my back. Do you ever think, he said, that studying human behavior is the same as confessing yours? Sometimes, I said, but confession without consequence is just performance. He turned. And yet you keep performing. So do you. He almost smiled. Touché. We stood in the kind of silence that feels measured in breaths instead of seconds. I could feel the weight of the folder between us, its contents, its consequences. He took it from my hands without looking at it, like a man accepting responsibility for a weapon he'll later deny owning. Next week, he said. Find who signs for the shipments. Which shipments? He didn't answer right away. You'll know when you see them. I stayed a little longer than I should have, watching him read my notes, each line an autopsy of another man's deceit. He never asked why my handwriting shook on the last page. He already knew. When I finally left, the night air felt surgical, too clean to belong to what we were doing. My heels struck the stone steps like metronomes of complicity. Somewhere behind me, I imagined him still at that window, staring at the city he refused to touch. I thought, we collect, yes. But sooner or later, someone always becomes the sample. Santori invited me to a small dinner at his villa on the Arno. The road along the river curled like a well-practiced lie. The water moved with the calm of things that have already made their case and won. The villa rose clean and pale out of cypress and shadow, all confident geometry and old money discretion. Light pooled on the gravel like quiet applause. Men in suits stood at angles designed to look natural from a distance. The guest list was curated to sound expensive. A banker with cufflinks that reflected the table's candles. A gallery owner whose vocabulary could launder almost anything. A councilman with a smile like an NDA, and a woman whose perfume arrived 2 seconds before she did. There were more names, none important individually, only as a chorus. Inside, the dining room had the chill of a museum and the acoustics of a confessional. The table was long enough to be a weapon, dark wood, high polish, the sort of surface that remembers where you place your hands. The walls wore paintings of power pretending to be taste. A decanter glowed in the middle like a warning light. He seated me to his right. Do people tell you secrets, Francesca? He said. Only when they want to be seen, I said. And me? You want to be believed, I said. He smiled and poured the wine himself. His fingers brushed mine. It was not an accident. I let my hand remain a fraction too long to be polite and not long enough to be promise. The contact registered, filed, archived, data with a pulse. He talked about partnerships the way actors talk about scripts, only in terms of scenes that serve them. His monologues came prefaced by soft laughter, the charming kind that removes objections by exhausting them. He loved the word alignment. He distrusted the word equal. When he said transparency, everyone nodded as if they had seen it once in captivity and found it beautiful. I asked about risk. He said, "Risk is just payment, and I always pay late." Everyone laughed like it was wit. I filed it as policy, late payers default. Late payers need someone else to be early. Between courses, the room practiced intimacy, warmed bread, comparative scandals, a story about a casino that could be rehabilitated, like a dog. The banker explained that ethics was the art of choosing the least actionable sin. The gallery owner agreed in French. The councilman, handsome in the way statues are, took calls on the terrace and returned with weather reports that sounded like favors. I watched Santori watch the table. He favored applause that arrived in the first 3 seconds. He touched his wine less than he touched the stem. He laughed with half his mouth, keeping the other half for the private version of events. Sometimes he stared into the candle as if it owed him a confession. He leaned toward me to cut the room's volume in half. "Do you find this performative?" he asked. "Everything is," I said. "Dinner is just theater with knives." He liked that. I could tell by the way he stopped blinking for one beat. The micro-stillness predators get when the wind changes in their favor. I smiled as if I didn't notice. My smile is fluent in plausible deniability. He asked about the dissertation. I gave him the polite architecture. Decision-making under pressure, institutional contradictions, moral dissonance as a structural product rather than a defect. He nodded at the right places and said something flattering about rigor that meant you can be useful. Every once in a while he speculated about art. What he meant was price. Every once in a while he speculated about politics. What he meant was leverage. When he said future, he meant ownership. Dessert arrived, some crystalline citrus that made the table brighter, and he didn't touch it. Control creates its own appetite. After coffee, darker than the river, hotter than the room deserved, the evening loosened. People moved to secondary chairs. The councilman discovered a reason to leave. The gallery owner's earrings flashed an argument and then forgave it. Santori stood, placing one palm flat on the table's lacquer, a proprietary blessing. Then he sat back down as if to remind the wood who it belonged to. A woman with the perfume of disaster grazed my arm and told me she loved my dress. I thanked her. She liked my name as a sound. She asked what I did in the tone of a human resources form. "Behavior," I said, and let the rest disappear. She drifted away like a rumor that knew it was true. When the party thinned to only people whose opinions mattered to his balance sheet, Santori recalibrated. The voice softened, the angle turned. He gave me the version of himself designed for private investment. That was when he said the line, "Risk is just payment, and I always pay late." The table, now intimate, now complicit, laughed again, but sharper, like crystal threatened with a fork. I held his gaze 1 second longer than my version of caution recommends, and mirrored one half smile. He saw what he needed to see. Vanity feeding on recognition. The night dismissed itself. Coats appeared with the efficiency of guilt. Men left in pairs of power and secrecy. I stepped into the hallway tempo of a house relearning how to be quiet. Santori walked me to the door, palm hovering where a gentleman's hand would have guided a waist. I didn't give it permission. He respected the refusal and admired it. Men like him love what they cannot own as long as it eventually invoices itself. "Next time," he said, "we try somewhere with worse food and better honesty." "I've never seen those two share a table," I said. "There's a first time for everything," he said. His teeth showed briefly. Something almost kind, immediately replaced. The car delivered me to the gate. The river delivered me to my reflection in the window. Florence looked curated from inside a chauffeured quiet. That night, in Luca's study, I gave him the line. "Late payers default," he said flatly. "He's telegraphing a cutout." "Then why sign with him at all?" I said. Because I can't get into 3 coastal licenses without him, he said. And because I prefer my enemies where I can invoice them. You could walk away. I could also breathe water, he said. We stared at each other across the glass table like it was a border. I felt the tug in my chest I had promised not to name. The city hung beneath the windows, lit and obedient. The architecture of power pretending to be geography. The folder between us became a compass that refused north. He read my notes the way men read verdicts, looking for the clause that saves them. I watched his eyes move and measured what they refused to rest on. He underlined payment without marking the word. He circled late by not reacting. He memorized the geometry of the phrase and discarded the theater. Next week he will invite you to something that feels private, Luca said finally. Go, but you go alone. No visible security. He measures fear. You're sending me without cover? I'll be there, he said. Just not where you can see me. Why? Because he's watching for me, he said. He's not yet watching for you. And that was the strategy. I was the window he would never suspect was a door. The minutes that followed were made of paper and breathing. He poured a drink I didn't touch. The ice surrendered without protest. He traced one finger along the edge of the table as if verifying its integrity. I closed my notebook and heard the soft slap of decisions being stacked for later. You're certain? I asked. Certainty is an affect, he said. I am prepared. Prepared for what? For him to behave like himself. I thought of the long table by the river, its reflective surface, the way Santori touched the lacquer like a man assessing whether the wood belonged to him or he belonged to the wood. I thought of the candlelight trapped in the glass of the decanter, trying to be a sun and failing. I thought of the line, risk is payment. I pay late, and the room laughing because it understood that late was the point. The private thing, I said. What do you think it is? A test, Luca said. Or an invitation disguised as one. To what? To stop pretending. We let the city be beautiful for a moment, because sometimes letting it be beautiful is the only way to remain unforgiven. I tucked a stray hair behind my ear and felt his attention move with it, not as a man's attention, but as an auditor's, checking whether the movement hid an intention. You'll have comms? He asked. Yes. You'll use them? If I need to. You'll need to, he said. I stood. He didn't. The distance between us felt like the page break in a book you don't want to turn because you like the sentence too much. I picked up my bag, my notes, my sense of balance. At the door, he said, Francesca. I turned. He didn't change his expression. He changed his breath. Don't improvise, he said. I don't, I said. He almost smiled. You improvise elegantly. I publish carefully, I said. We were both right. Neither of us was reassured. Outside, Bello Sguardo held the night the way a hand holds a secret, not tightly enough to crush it, not loosely enough to lose it. I descended the steps and felt the river pull the city toward its morning. He stayed where the light could pin him to the window. I stayed where his absence could do the same. And in the thin layer of air between consequence and intent, the plan hardened. A private invitation, a room, no visible security, fear as a measurable output. I was the window. He was the wall. Santori was the draft that finds the seam. We would see who blinked first. The private poker night looked like a harmless ritual. It was not. 6 men, no phones. The kind of room where chairs remember who died in them. They took my coat the way certain institutions take testimony, politely, with the understanding it may not be returned in the same shape. The room was layered in masculine quiet. Heavy curtains, card felt as green as plausible innocence, a bar cart tidied into apology. Lamps cast circles of compliant light. The air smelled faintly of leather, citrus peel, and the low hum of favors owed. Santori welcomed me with a hand at the small of my back for a second too long. He introduced me as the brilliant Francesca to men who wore their appetites like medals. A banker with a cufflink shaped like restraint, a developer whose smile contained a demolition permit, a lawyer who called the deck precedent. Someone made a joke about psychology and luck. I smiled as if I believed in both. We took our places, which is to say, they sat to be seen winning. I positioned myself to see who needed to be seen winning. I didn't play, I watched. Cheaters always repeat their best trick where they think no one can see it. The dealer was the quietest man in the room, which made him the most dangerous. He cut the deck with the neat authority of a priest handling sacrament. Cards moved. Money murmured. Men cleared their throats in the dialect of entitlement. Santori's laugh traveled just far enough to touch every ear, then returned to its leash. He won without winning. He let other men beat themselves. A hesitation here, a folded queen there, generosity that felt like anesthesia. In between hands, he talked about the casino acquisition like it was already sanctified. Clean tables, clean staff, clean oversight, he said. Clean money? I said. He laughed. You'll make me honest? And will you like that? I said. I like being understood, he said. It makes betrayal less likely. You expect betrayal? I prefer insurance, he said. Men nodded at the word the way plants lean toward sun. I filed the line as policy. His worldview priced in treachery. Loyalty was merely a deductible. He wore a navy jacket calculated to look effortless, a watch that declined to be noticed, and the posture of a man holding a door for his own future. He glanced at me between turns, not to admire, but to verify. Did I understand the choreography? I did. I made sure he believed I nearly didn't. A man to my left chewed an ice cube down to surrender, losing money with the bravado of someone spending a story he'll never tell at home. Another man stacked chips with military symmetry, compensation masquerading as strategy. The lawyer adjusted his tie whenever he lied. By the third lie, the tie looked accused. Santori didn't fidget. He used stillness as narrative. Even his losing hands were composed to suggest magnanimity. He cued laughter with a tilt of the glass. People responded with the gratitude of those recently absolved. At the second break, he drifted to the bar and poured Amaro as if it were jurisdiction. I declined a refill with the grace of a woman who knows the difference between looser tongues and louder mistakes. He leaned near enough for his voice to arrive warm. You're quiet, he said. I've never met a secret that enjoyed echo, I said. He smiled with half his mouth, the other half saving itself for after the verdict. He straightened a stack of napkins that hadn't needed straightening. Men like him control small orders when they can't trust large ones. When the game resumed, I shifted my chair a degree. From this angle, I could track the dealer's left thumb, a tiny hitch on high cards he didn't want to telegraph. He wasn't fixing the game. He was arranging its mood. Mood is outcome's older cousin. Santori let the developer take a fat pot and pretended to care. The developer grew 3 inches taller in his chair. The banker tried to look indifferent and failed. Money rarely tolerates indifference in others. The lawyer bluffed with the serenity of a man who had settled worse. The room's oxygen changed hands. In between hands, Santori returned to catechism. Clean tables, clean staff, clean oversight, he said again. To no one and everyone. Clean money, I repeated, a little softer, like continuity rather than challenge. His eyes flicked, quick and mean, then softened as if he'd changed his mind about showing that part. You'll make me honest, he said, and we both let the future pretend it knew how. I watched for microtells, the way he placed his drink, precisely as if aligning a grid no one else could see. The way he touched his ring finger when someone said regulator, the fractional delay before his laugh when the word audit surfaced. He was fluent in omission. It takes practice to appear transparent. The line about insurance was too neat. Neat lines hide trapdoors. I excused myself. Bathroom, powder, something female and uncontroversial, and let my steps drift down the wrong corridor with the right carelessness. I walked past his study with the door ajar. On the desk, a ledger under a blank sheet, the old-fashioned kind men use when they don't want to share with computers. A pen rested like a sentry. The window watched the river. I didn't enter, I looked. Sometimes not touching is more useful. It keeps you invited back. The blank sheet told me more than ink. He was writing 2 stories, one to remember, one to survive. On the way back, I paused at a painting, market-level modernism pretending at danger, and let time move around me. A staff member appeared in my periphery, too quickly to be coincidence, too slowly to be kindness. Good houses know when a guest becomes data. I resumed being harmless. When I returned, he offered me his seat as a joke. I declined as a rule. Men like him enjoy the illusion of deference almost as much as the thing itself. He took the seat again with a smile that said he was generous for allowing me a boundary, a final hand. The dealer stacked the deck with the care of a man who loves his job more than his sleep. The banker tried to win back dignity with chips and lost both. The developer looked euphoric and doomed, the most dangerous combination in urban planning. The lawyer began the first sentence of an alibi, and wisely didn't finish it. At the end of the night, he escorted me to the foyer. The house exhaled in relief, the way beautiful rooms do when things leave them in the condition in which they were found. Outside, the river moved with the same bureaucratic grace it had at the beginning. "You're not like the others," he said. "I hear that a lot," I said. "From him?" he said. "From men who assume I'm listening," I said. His eyes flicked again, quick and mean, then softened. "Practice overtaking impulse. Tell him," he said, almost kindly, "that I'm a better friend than a foe." "Tell whom?" I said. He smiled the smile of a man who doesn't need the answer to prove he knows it. "Exactly," he said. He offered me my coat like a favor he could invoice later. I took it with the gratitude of someone who knows how long favors live. As the door opened, the house's warmth surrendered me back to the night. 2 guards looked away so efficiently I felt seen. In the car, Florence blurred into confident geometry. I replayed gestures the way analysts replay tape. The ledger under white paper, the napkins corrected, the half-mouth laugh, the way insurance had landed with applause. He had spoken like a man who believed in vaults. He had played like a man who believed in mirrors. Back at Bellosguardo, the city lay below Luca's windows like a patient file, still open, never closed. I relayed the evening, line by line, removing charm until only structure remained. He listened the way a safe listens, silent, precise, recording weight rather than content. "Clean tables, clean staff, clean oversight," I said. "Clean cover," he said. "He's laundering attention. And the ledger? Paper refuses subpoenas better than servers," he said. "He's keeping a private truth." I gave him the line about risk and late payments. He didn't blink. "Late payers default," he said. "He's telegraphing a cutout. Then why sign with him at all?" I said. "Because I can't get into 3 coastal licenses without him," he said. "And because I prefer my enemies where I can invoice them." "You could walk away. I could also breathe water," he said. We stared at each other across the glass table like it was a border. The folder on its surface became a country with no embassy. I felt the tug in my chest I had promised not to name. He noticed, not as a man, but as an auditor. A fluctuation in a previously stable metric. "Next week he will invite you to something that feels private," Luca said finally. "Go, but you go alone. No visible security." He measures fear. "You're sending me without cover?" "I'll be there," he said. "Just not where you can see me." "Why?" "Because he's watching for me," he said. "He's not yet watching for you." And that was the strategy. I was the window he would never suspect was a door. On my way out, I passed the mirror in his hall. For a moment, it held 2 women, the one who observes and the one observed. I told myself they were the same and watched my mouth fail to agree. Outside, the night resumed its professional distance. Somewhere on the river, a boat moved without hurry, not because it had nowhere to be, but because it had already decided who would arrive late. I sent Luca a summary that night, coded as agreed. The encryption key was built from the first letters of saints I no longer believed in. He replied 3 hours later, a single instruction that arrived like a verdict. "Hold. Confirm names." The message glowed faintly on the encrypted line, short enough to feel absolute. Luca didn't waste language. He rationed it. Every word had the weight of something that had survived cross-examination. The next morning, the invitation came through Santori's assistant. A charity auction in Siena, proceeds to some vague educational foundation, the kind of event that turned virtue into currency and sin into sponsorship. I wore a dress that said I could run in it, silk that moved like smoke, heels that promised elegance, but delivered escape. Siena glowed in the late afternoon like a city built entirely from promises made in candlelight. The venue, a former monastery turned cultural hall, was all arches and acoustics, frescoes dimmed to protect their modesty. Santori thrived in such places. Sanctity disguised his ambition. He met me at the door, his hand brushing mine just long enough to register intent. "You came," he said as if I'd fulfilled a prophecy. "You invited," I said. He smiled. "I like people who respond to opportunity." "I prefer people who define it," I said. He liked that too. His eyes sharpened in appreciation, not of me, but of symmetry. Men like him admire defiance only when it mirrors their own. Inside, the crowd performed philanthropy with crystal glasses and applause calibrated to price tags. He introduced me to a woman whose jewelry was a confession and a banker who smiled with all teeth. Someone mentioned civic responsibility. Someone else mispronounced ethics. I laughed in the right places. I asked questions that sounded innocent, and wrote the answers in the private shorthand of intuition. When the bidding began, Santori raised his paddle twice, once for art, once for influence. He knew both were temporary assets. At 9, I excused myself, claiming fatigue. The truth, that I'd collected enough to make him curious but not suspicious, would have sounded like strategy. The ride back to Florence was a blur of dark vineyards and self-rehearsal. I sent Luca a voice note wrapped in noise. Siena event. No overt tells. Repeating themes. Control. Friendship. Loyalty as currency. He didn't respond until I reached Bello Sguardo. He was at the desk, reading my transcribed notes under the lamp's tight light. He said, "Better friend than foe," Luca repeated, weighing each word like it had a detonator inside. "He's offering a warning or a recruitment. Likely both. He thinks I belong to you," I said. "He thinks everyone belongs to someone," Luca said. "He's not wrong." I watched his hand close the folder, the motion too controlled to be calm. The silence between us had become a method. "You want me to keep going?" I said. "Yes." "You're sure?" "I'm certain," he said, and the certainty cost him something I couldn't name, something soft beneath all that marble. "Then give me cover," I said. "One person in the room I can see." "No," he said. "If you can see them, so can he." "You're asking me to be alone," I said. "I'm asking you to look alone," he said. "That's different." He was right, and I hated him for it. Not because of the danger, but because he trusted my composure more than he trusted my safety. When I turned to leave, he called my name softly, the way a priest might before a confession. "Francesca." I paused. He didn't move closer. He didn't need to. "Don't improvise," he said. "I won't," I said. We both knew I would. By the 3rd week, Santori's posture changed. Warmth turned into weather, a brief front of sun, then shade you couldn't argue with. He spoke less and listened like he was timing my breath. At dinner, he told me a childhood story that contradicted the version from the poker table. Same winter, different city. Same grandfather, different lesson. I didn't correct him. I smiled as if both could be true. In this world, truth is not a statement. It's a costume. He drummed his middle finger when I asked about the custodian bank again. Right hand, same rhythm. The habit of a man who counts enemies like calories. He told me the fund's Latin name wrong on purpose, a single letter deformed into misdirection. I laughed like I didn't hear it, and he watched my mouth like punctuation. "You ask too few questions for someone who pretends to care," he said. "Finally, I thought you liked being believed," I said. "I like being admired," he said. "Belief is optional. Admiration is cheaper to counterfeit." I let the notion pass between us like a neutral courier and stroked the stem of my glass. A small betrayal of patience I knew he'd notice. Men like Santori measure attention as an asset class. He leaned back, a degree of distance that meant test accepted. When I left, a black car idled too long at the corner. Engine low. Headlights at that polite angle cars use when pretending not to look. I changed streets twice and the car didn't. My stomach became an abacus. I cut across a square where pigeons rehearsed their exit strategies and slipped into a bookstore with 2 exits and the smell of paper that has known better years. I stayed 20 minutes running my finger along spines I couldn't afford, essays on ethics, a biography of a regulator who died with an unposted letter in his desk, a slim volume of poems about rivers pretending to be roads. The clerk looked at me with the solidarity of people who worship inventory. When I came out, the car was gone. Or had learned patience. Patience is just surveillance with better posture. That night I told Luca everything. I coded my notes as we'd agreed. First letters of saints I no longer believed in. Inverted dates. A shorthand that converted risk into neat italics. He read twice, lips unmoving, like he was conferring with a jury only he could hear. He didn't pace. He didn't swear. He just lowered his voice until it felt like an order crawled across the table. "He's testing you," he said. "He suspects you're not neutral." "Then pull me out," I said. "No." "Why not?" "Because we are close," he said. He's tightening his circle. When men like Santori do that, they risk telling the truth to hear how it sounds. And if he decides I'm the wrong ear, then I move. What does that mean? He didn't blink. It means I stop collecting. The room contracted around that sentence. The lamp made a small, stable halo. The glass table considered its reflection. "You kill him," I said. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Silence can be declarative when it wants. "You sent me alone," I said, quieter now, without permission to be afraid. "I sent you because you don't confuse fear with failure," he said. "You're confusing certainty with safety," I said. He stepped closer and the air changed temperature, like the room had inhaled. His eyes did that thing, accounting for variables without announcing them. He looked like a man arguing with a principal he'd married too young. "Don't go tomorrow," he said suddenly. "I have to," I said. "You don't owe me this," he said. "I don't owe you," I said. "I owe the work." He looked at me like he wanted to say, "I owe you my life," and swallowed it like a sin. You could watch the sentence descend, a visible self-censoring, a control system preserving itself. The city hung below the window, as if waiting for a verdict it already knew. "Be careful," he said. "I'm not the one who underestimates me," I said. He touched my jaw. Light. Unsure the way a man touches an idea. Not possession, not apology. A hypothesis. I didn't lean in. I didn't step back. We held the line because crossing it would have made us honest in ways the job couldn't afford. "Good night," I said. "Good night," he said, and added, "Not yet," as if he had bitten his own tongue to keep from saying the thing after. I left the villa into a night that had arranged itself for discretion. The driveway lamps put careful halos on the gravel. The cypresses wore the posture of guards promoted beyond their ambition. My car waited where it should, facing the road like an obedient sentence waiting for its verb. On the way home, Florence played its usual tricks. Bridges pretending to be decisions, river light pretending to be clarity. I drove the long way, not because I needed to, but because distance can sometimes dilute consequence. It didn't. In my apartment, I reread the notes with the ache of someone auditing their own blood. Contradiction log. Childhood story. A versus childhood story. B. Map the mismatch to dates in newspapers. Verify weather. Tell log. Middle finger drum on custodian bank. Non-reaction to AML, but micro-stillness on KYC. Wrong Latin letter. Deliberate mislabeling. Likely second ledger. Threat envelope, black car. Bookstore tale, patience initiating stage. I wrote, "If I'm the wrong ear, he improvises." Then added, "If I'm the right ear, he confesses on purpose." Either option produces heat. I showered with the door unlocked, not out of bravado, out of ritual fatigue. Steam replaced a portion of the night with an amnesty I hadn't earned. In the mirror, my face looked like a draft I'd revised too many times. I pressed 2 fingers to my own pulse and counted, not to calm, but to document. Sleep came with a receipt. I dreamed a deck of cards where every suit was the same. Black, 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 black. Woke at 03:11 with the sense that someone had called my name from the hallway and then apologized to the dark. Wrote, "He wants admiration, not belief in the notebook by the bed." and turned the page like changing names. Morning began with the inbox trying to pretend it was a sunrise. Centauri's assistant had sent a polite reminder about tomorrow's smaller thing, which is how they label tests too intimate for calendars. Luca's message was shorter than breath. Hold, confirm names. He had repeated it. Repetition is either mercy or order. With him, it was both. I dressed in competence, blouse with edges, skirt with exit velocity, shoes that didn't invite negotiation. I chose a coat that could hide a wire, and a courage that could hide a tremor. In the mirror, I practiced neutrality until it looked like charm. On the tram to the archive for a decoy hour, I watched reflections shapeshift in the window. My face traded for a stranger's, then back again. A woman across from me read a novel whose cover promised redemption. She held it like a shield. The conductor made an announcement everyone pretended to understand. City choreography. Back at Bello Sguardo before dusk, Luca's study had reorganized itself by force of his thinking. 2 maps now, one coastal, one financial. A red thread that had started as metaphor was trying to become a route. He was writing names on a yellow legal pad, because software forgives too much. He admires himself through you, he said, not looking up. That's a risk vector and a gift. He wants to be heard, I said. Not questioned. So stop asking, he said. Make him finish his own sentences. And if he stops talking? Then he's decided. On what? He looked up then. Where to put you? I let the silence land. Somewhere in the villa, a door closed with the careful sound of wealth putting itself away. You said don't go, I said. I also said we are close, he answered. Proximity isn't a finding, I said. It's a symptom. Sometimes it's a cure, he said. And we both knew he didn't mean for whom. When I turned to leave, he said my name the way surgeons say now. Francesca, if something changes, you leave. No data is worth you. It was the first time he'd said it that way. The sentence moved through me like a new rule written over an old scar. I nodded, because what else is there? Outside, evening laid its bureaucratic blue over the hills. I rehearsed the plan until rehearsal felt like prayer, then let the prayer die a civilized death. Tomorrow would come arranged like a choice. I would recognize it by how little it offered. I sent myself to bed like a soldier. The last thing I saw before the dark took inventory was Luca's face at not yet, a hinge refusing to admit the door had already moved. And in the corridor of sleep, where fear and certainty borrow each other's shoes, I understood the shape of the next hour. A room that believes in silence, a man who believes in admiration, and a truth that believes in no one. On the way home, the city was a set piece, gorgeous and unhelpful, every street lamp performing composure. Florence at night has the vanity of a woman who knows she's being watched. The river glimmered like a line of reasoning I could no longer defend. I crossed the bridge, the air thick with diesel and sanctity, and turned down a street I didn't usually take. It was narrow enough to feel curated, wide enough to make you think you had a choice. A shadow detached itself from a wall and became a shape that became a man. Francesca, he said, as if we were old friends. I kept walking. My heels measured the cobblestones, each step a metronome of composure. The shape matched my speed, half a beat behind, never closing the distance, the way professionals do when they want to remind you they can. The sound of the river followed us. Low, continuous, like the hum of someone thinking aloud. The air had a temperature that meant something was about to be decided. My body knew it before my mind caught up. I let my pace slow enough to listen, not enough to invite. At the corner, a car door opened without sound. An expensive silence, engineered and deliberate. From inside, a second voice called my name again, very softly, like a rehearsal. It was almost gentle, the way warnings sometimes are when they come from people who think you might still turn back. That was when I understood the class had ended. Whatever came next wouldn't be graded. It would be paid for. I didn't run. Running tells the story for you. Instead, I let the city continue its performance. The shuttered cafes, the scent of baked sugar ghosts, the windows pretending to sleep. Every reflection in the glass became an equation: angle, distance, outcome. I changed sidewalks, my shadow obeying the choreography, and let the night listen. The car followed, half a block behind, patient and professional. Not hunting, hurting. In another life, I might have called Luca. In this one, I knew he was already listening. Somewhere, a device would register my footsteps. A microphone would catalog the tremor I refused to have. I thought of his warning, if something changes, you leave, and wondered if this counted as change or inevitability. The man's footsteps shortened. Pavement compressed time. A window above flickered on, then off again, the light deciding it wanted no witnesses. I passed the shadow of a church and almost laughed. Even the saints had gone to ground. I smiled into the dark as if I had been waiting for this moment all along. Because part of me the experiment was over. The subject had noticed the observer. When I turned the next corner, the street narrowed into secrecy. The car paused at the intersection, idling like an unfinished thought. The man slowed, stopped, then melted back into the kind of darkness that keeps books on how to wait. I didn't look back. Looking back is permission. At the next light, the wind picked up, warm, wrong, almost affectionate. The bells from across the river began their nightly confession, one for every lie I'd told in the name of research. I listened until the sound became a pulse I didn't recognize. The work had stopped being academic. The descent had finally properly begun. It happened 2 nights later. Rain again. Always rain. As if the sky had joined the conspiracy. Florence shimmered under a curtain of water, neon and cobblestone whispering in the same language of ruin. I was supposed to meet Santori at a hotel bar near the Ponte Vecchio, a public place too polished to allow violence. That's what Luca had said. Crowds are insurance, he'd told me. He was wrong. The bar was the kind of place that performed safety. Too many mirrors, too much perfume. I waded through 2 glasses of wine and 1 unread message. At some point, I realized I was being watched. The gaze pressed down like humidity, invisible but relentless. I checked my phone again. Nothing. The screen reflected my own unease. Pale, distorted, abstract. I left through the side exit instead of the lobby. The rain hissed against the pavement, muting everything but my heartbeat. Halfway down the alley, a car door slammed. Francesca. The voice behind me was too calm, too familiar. I turned, and the world collapsed into motion, a flash of metal, a shove. Pain bloomed across my ribs, bright and intimate. The first hit was professional. The second was personal, then the air tore open with a gunshot. Another. The sound wasn't loud. It was decisive. A punctuation mark at the end of an argument no one had won. I hit the ground hard, half conscious, the rain thickening around me until it felt like the city itself was bleeding. My vision fractured into shards. The glint of headlights. The smear of red against the curb. A shadow falling. I remember thinking, so this is how data ends. Unarchived. When the noise cleared, I heard my name again. Softer this time. Desperate. Francesca. It was Luca. He was on his knees beside me, rain soaking his coat, gun still smoking. The world had gone gray except for his eyes. Too bright, too wet. The kind of eyes that stopped belonging to men who give orders. "Don't move," he said, pressing his hand to my side. His voice was trembling now, stripped of its armor. Blood seeped through his fingers, and he stared at it as if the color itself had betrayed him. "No, no, no, stay with me," he whispered, and I realized he wasn't talking to God. He was talking to me. "I'm fine," I lied. "You're not fine," he said, his jaw shaking. He stopped. The word died in his throat. He looked down at his hands again, the rain turning blood to watercolor. "What have I done?" he whispered. "You followed me?" "I had to." "That's not protocol." He laughed. A broken, wet sound, halfway between a sob and a curse. "Neither is this." Lightning tore the sky. He lifted me carefully, his arms trembling under the weight. Not of my body, but of the moment. The rain mixed with something else now. His tears, unhidden, falling against my face as he carried me. Why are you shaking? I asked. He blinked, rain and grief indistinguishable. Because I can't... His voice cracked completely. Because I can't lose you. He laid me down near the car, knees sinking into the puddles, both of us breathing like confessions. Listen to me, he said, clutching my hand like he could stop time through pressure alone. You don't get to die here. Not in this street. Not like this. Not for him. You don't understand, he said again, tears sliding across the bridge of his nose. I can't fix this. I can't control this. I can't, he exhaled hard, shaking. You're the only thing I can't rebuild if it breaks. I wanted to speak, but the air wouldn't listen. He bent over me, forehead pressed to mine, eyes wild with ruin. His voice came out raw, almost childish. Do you hear me? You don't leave me. Don't. Then he broke. No control, no command, just breath and rain and grief. I love you, he said. Not as a declaration, but as a confession dragged from the wreckage. It came out shaking, like something finally escaping captivity. I saw him then, not the strategist, not the man who built empires, just a man crying into the storm, holding me as if I were both sin and salvation. I know, I whispered. I know. He kissed me once, salt, rain, and blood on his lips. A kiss that was half a plea, half a prayer, as if he could keep me alive by remembering how. And when he pulled back, I saw it. The tears, falling freely this time, indistinguishable from the rain, but real enough to break me. When I woke, it was morning. White ceiling, antiseptic light. The machines beside me blinked in rhythm with my pulse. A fragile hymn of survival. He was in the chair by the window, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, eyes hollow from a night that hadn't ended. Dawn softened his edges, turning power into exhaustion, danger into quiet remorse. You live dangerously, I said. He looked up, and something inside him broke open, gentle and unguarded. You live, he said softly. The simplicity of it hit deeper than any apology. What happened? It's over, he said. Centauri's gone. His men too. It's finished. The words felt unreal, like peace wearing someone else's clothes. You killed him. He hesitated, eyes dark and tired. I ended it, before it could reach you again. Silence hung like fog. Even the monitors seemed to listen. He rose slowly, walked toward me, each step weighted with regret. When he stopped beside the bed, his voice was no longer the one that gave orders. It was the voice of someone who'd run out of them. He moved closer, rain still clinging to his coat, eyes full of everything he'd never said. You came, I whispered, half in disbelief, half in gratitude. I did, he said quietly. I will always be close to you from now on if you let me. His voice broke on the last word. The control that once defined him was gone, replaced by something raw and human. He sat down, elbows on his knees, hands trembling slightly. When he finally met my gaze, it wasn't a look of triumph. It was a man begging his own conscience for mercy. I should have never let you near any of this, he said. His voice cracked. I thought I could protect you by controlling everything. But all I did was put you in danger. He reached out, then stopped halfway, afraid, uncertain. I turned my hand and closed the distance. His fingers were warm and shaking. You almost died because of me, he said, barely breathing the words. And I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. He swallowed hard, eyes glassy, voice trembling with a weight that didn't belong to men like him. I should have protected you. I should have been the shield, not the reason you needed one. You were never part of the plan, and now you're the only thing that matters. A tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't try to hide it. I love you, he whispered. I've loved you from the moment you looked at me like I was already known. I was too proud to name it, too afraid to admit it, but it's the only truth I have left. I brushed the tear from his face, my hand trembling. You already started making it right, I said softly. He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for years. His forehead met mine. No urgency, no control. Just stillness, the kind that feels like forgiveness. For the first time, there was no power to fight over, no danger left to outrun. Only two people who had survived their own destruction and somehow found grace in the wreckage. Outside, Florence exhaled too. The rain had stopped. The light turned gold over the wet rooftops, the river gleaming like it was breathing again. He lifted my hand and pressed it to his chest. The heartbeat was steady, human, real. "Can you forgive me?" he whispered. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself, but if you let me, I'll spend forever trying." I smiled through the ache, through the memory of rain and blood and love that had almost undone us both. "You already have," I said. He leaned down and kissed me, softly, reverently, like a promise made to something holy. When he pulled back, his tears met mine, indistinguishable from the morning light. "Now what?" I asked. "Now," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We start over." Florence shimmered beyond the window, cleansed and quiet. Not sin, not secrecy, just consequence. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. 2 weeks later, Florence remembered how to breathe. The rain had stopped. The streets shone like something newly discovered, washed clean of the sins that had written us into their cobblestones. The air smelled of coffee, stone, and possibility. I walked slowly, as if the ground might forgive me for stepping on it. The city felt lighter, or maybe I did. Luca had stayed. Not as a shadow, not as a command, but as a man learning how to exist without armor. We never spoke of the hospital again. Some wounds belong to silence. It's the only language they trust. He met me that morning at the river. The Arno caught the light and threw it back at us, golden and unreal. He looked different, still dangerous, still elegant, but touched by something that resembled peace. "You shouldn't be walking this soon," he said, though his voice carried no authority anymore. "I needed to see the city dry," I said. He smiled faintly. "You always talked about Florence like it was judging you. So, did it forgive you now?" "I don't think Florence knows how to hold grudges," I said. "It just rains until it forgets," he laughed, quiet, almost surprised by the sound. For the first time, it didn't sound like control breaking. It sounded like relief. We walked along the water, close enough for our shoulders to brush. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was simply alive. "I keep replaying that night," he said finally. "Everything I did wrong. Everything I almost lost. You can stop," I said gently. "It's over." He shook his head. "Not for me. I should have protected you. I should have trusted you enough to keep you safe without trying to own the danger myself." I stopped walking. "You can't rewrite it, Luca." "No," he said softly, stepping closer. "But I can live differently because of it." He reached for my hand, slow, deliberate. Not the command of a man used to being obeyed, but the gesture of someone asking to be believed. "I will never put you in harm's way again," he said. "Not for business, not for pride, not for any empire I thought mattered. You're the only thing I can't lose again." His voice trembled just once. He didn't look away. "I don't know if you can forgive me," he said. "But if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life learning how." The world narrowed to his eyes, to the raw, unguarded truth there. The man who once made cities bend had finally bowed to something he couldn't control. I lifted our joined hands, pressed them to his chest. His heartbeat was steady, certain, human. "I already did," I said. He exhaled, like the word itself untied every knot inside him. For a moment, neither of us moved. The sunlight reached the river, scattering gold like spilled forgiveness. He brushed his thumb along my wrist. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we stop pretending we were ever on opposite sides," I said. "Now we start over." Luca smiled. Not the smile of a man who won, but of one who finally surrendered to what was real. He leaned in, and I met him halfway. The kiss was gentle, unhurried, full of everything we had survived. Rain and blood and redemption. It wasn't an ending. It was the first breath after drowning. When we finally pulled apart, Florence glowed behind him, alive again. For the first time, there was no fear left in me, no strategy, no masquerade, just the quiet certainty that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is stay alive long enough to love someone honestly. And that, at last, was what we did.